there's something about the place. You say it was a community.
It was a community, and the community raised everyone. And the one thing that we were taught is that you always respect your family. And now you might act up at home, but when you got out, you represented the family, and you didn't embarrass the family. And they always expected for us to do our best at all times, and to be honest, have integrity, and respect elders.
What did your parents do?
And my mom was a school teacher. She graduated from SIU Normal Teachers College, and she taught for a couple of years. She had a 2-year degree, and she taught for a couple of years, but at that time, when you got married, you had to quit teaching. So she got married, she stopped teaching, started having children, and in her later years, she wound up being a cook for Walgreens drugstore in Centralia. So she did that most of her, my growing up years. My dad was a carpenter. Since he was African American, he couldn't belong to union, so his wages were lower than union wages in Centralia. And carpentry work, as you know, is seasonal. So it was good in the spring, summer, and fall, and then slow in the winter.
Got a friend who does that. Even he says it's still true today.
Yes.
You attended segregated schools early in life. There were a lot of expectations. The expectations were very high for you children.
Expectations were tremendously high. And I did attend an all African American elementary school, and we had outstanding teachers. They cared for you, and they kept you in line. It's interesting because I always tell everyone I can name every one of my elementary school teachers from the 1st grade all the way through the 8th grade. And still friends with some, some have passed away. And they still look at us as their products and what they gave to us. And the one thing that happened is in our elementary school, we went to an integrated high school. Fortunately, Centralia only had one high school that was integrated. And again, they told us, when you go out there, you're representing Lincoln Elementary School, so we want you to be the best. And they taught us that way.
Played football, high school?
Yes, played football in high school. I ran track in high school. And it was interesting because if you played football or basketball in high school, you had to go out for track. There was no question. You went out for track, and that was to, number one, improve your ability to run a little bit faster, or stamina, a few things like that. And it did help. And then my senior year, we brought baseball into the high school level, so I wound up in the track season and the baseball season at the same time.
So you lettered in a lot of sports.
Yes, lettered in quite a few.
What laid the pathway for you to come to SIU?
Well, it was interesting because when I was looking to go to college, number one, I wanted to go to university, and my folks wanted me to go to university. Mom, like I said, she had a 2-year degree, and no one in my family had a 4-year degree. I had a sister who had gone to Kaskaskia College for a couple of years, but I wanted to go to college. And I was a good student, and I wanted to be a doctor. But my folks didn't have medical school money. There were no scholarships that I was aware of. So I figured to go to college, I was going to need to be an athlete and get some help because I didn't know a lot about academic scholarships. So I decided that I would try to get it in football. And it was interesting because I got an invite to 4 different schools, 2 historically black colleges, Tennessee State and Maryland State. Then I had an invitation to Bradley and to SIU. Well, my first trip was to Tennessee State, and I went down there. I was impressed with it. However, I was 135 pounds at the time, planning on playing quarterback, and they had people back from the Korean War that were, 230, 240 pounds, and I looked at them, and they were tough. And what really killed it is that, number one, the coach didn't want me to go back home and graduate from high school. He wanted me to start practicing football at that particular time. And I went out to watch the women's track team. And if you recall, Tennessee State, being at that time historically a black college, they had 4 women on a 4x100 relay team called the Tiger Bells, who had won the Olympics. And I looked out there and I couldn't even outrun the women. So I said, this is not the place for me. So then I came back thinking about looking at Bradley uh, and possibly Maryland State, SIU. And got a call from SIU, that they were interested in me coming out, giving it a crack. And they also gave me an opportunity to have a summer job out a little grassy. So not having a lot of money, that sounded very intriguing. And also, they had a good chemistry department, so I decided I would come to SIU.
You were a chemistry major when you came here?
Yes, I was a chemistry major and a math minor.
Were you the first African-American quarterback here?
Yes, I was.
What was that like?
Well, it was interesting because at that time, they didn't have African Americans playing quarterback at any white universities that I'm aware of. I started playing first string in 1956, and the first African American at a major college was Sandy Stevens in 1958.
How did the coach treat you? What was that experience like here?
The experience was good, and one thing about growing up African American, you learn some of the thought processes of the majority population. But we had a good coaching staff. The head coach was Al Kwall, and the backfield coach was Carmen Picone. And an interesting thing happened when I first started playing quarterback. There was one coach who I thought was a little bit racist, and so he came up to me one day and put his arm around my shoulder and said, you have such good talent. You have such great hands. You have such good speed, which all were fibs. You should be a flanker. You really should be a flanker. That's where it would help the team best, and that's where your talents would be used better. But anyway, he was talking to me as a friend, and trying to compromise what I was going to try to do. But anyway, my thrust was I wanted an education. So if I hadn't had some support, I'd probably wound up being a flanker. But my backfield coach, Carmen Picone, overheard this conversation. And he came, he always hugged me all the time. He put his arms around my shoulder. He said, Bill, you might not understand what's going on, but I do. And he said, you're my quarterback. If you stop being a quarterback, I'll take your scholarship. He said, you don't have to worry about that other coach. I'm backfield coach. You have my support, and you have the support of the head coach, Al Kwall. And it was a breeze from there on in. We're at an airport. So
we are at an airport,
yeah.
And let's talk about that a little bit.
Okay.
We kind of jumped ahead. When did you start getting interested in aviation?
Well, I got interested in aviation when I was still in elementary school. My elementary school principal, who came to our elementary school, and our elementary school at that particular time was having a little bit of problem with discipline because we had a principal that we could kind of run over. So we got this new principal who happened to be from Carbondale. His name was William Harold Walker, and he also been a Tuskegee Airman, and he was tough. And so he came in and got things straightened out real quickly. And at the time, he and his wife didn't have any children, so he became a mentor. I looked up to him. When he started talking about airplanes in a classroom, which we would try to divert him often, you'd just see his eyes light up and he would beam how proud he was. And he'd stay on it about 3 or 4 minutes, then he'd go back to the lesson. But one of the things that really impressed me is how he demanded excellence from students. And the one thing that would really get the hairs on the back of his neck to curl up, if you said get instead of get. He said the word is not get, it's get. And if you wanted to have a fight with him, you do that. But he also was a good mathematician. And so we wound up going fishing. He'd take me fishing, and he'd talk about airplanes. And I just saw how much interest and how much I respected him. That's the first time I started getting interested in aviation.
You also, that interest in aviation was really nurtured here at SIU. You were part of a very early group in the aviation history of this place.
Yes, I was one of the first ones in some of the first classes. And one of the interesting things is that when you go through life and you get some situations from a particular group of people that are not fair, it's sometimes difficult not to treat everyone with a negative impression.
guess they're using that for advanced training now, I understand.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was what I heard from Newmeyer a while
Yeah.
back, that they were maybe looking at that. And as you were saying,
And when I got ready to think about getting into the Air Force, well, a couple of things. There weren't a lot of professional opportunities for African Americans. You know, you could be a teacher, a preacher, possibly a doctor, someone didn't get in medical school, or a dentist. So there weren't a lot of professional opportunities. So the idea of being a flight officer in the Air Force was a wonderful opportunity. So that's the route I chose. So anyway, a friend of mine who had been in the aviation program the year before had told me that this instructor, I hope you don't get this one instructor, his name was Glenn Sheets. But anyway, he told me that I hope you don't get this one instructor, Glenn Sheets, that he's really prejudiced. And of course, next year when I started my pilot training, it was Glenn Sheets. And my attitude is that you don't take someone else's opinion about a person just because they didn't have success with them. And so I found out Glenn wasn't prejudiced. Glenn was just mean, and which is great. You know, he just wanted you to learn a certain way, and he was a great instructor. And I had a lot of success under Glenn, and Glenn and I became friends. I mean, and it was a wonderful experience.
what did he tell you for when you were about to solo for the first time?
Oh, it was interesting because you know, most people were soloing at 8 or 9 hours, and I was ready to solo, and I felt I was getting close, but I didn't think I was that close. So I soloed at 5.5 hours, and it was out here on runway 24. We shot a couple of, but let's see, we were talking about Glenn Sheets, and what was the question you asked?
Solo.
On the solo. So anyway, we were shooting landings on a typical day like today out on 24, and so Glenn got out of the airplane. We got to the end of 24, and Glenn got out of the airplane and said, "Will you take this thing by yourself before you kill me?" And so Glenn was on the side of the runway, and being a pilot, you know, when you start to take off, you get a lot of torque, so you got to really stick that left rudder in there to keep it going straight. But Glenn was on the right side of the runway, and when I first started taking off, remember the airplane's a little bit lighter too, so it reacts a lot better. And when it started pulling to the right, I finally got that rudder in, and everything went well, because I could always land an airplane. You know, I could land airplane. I still land an airplane well if I say so myself. But that was fun. And so Glenn actually put me up for my check ride at 30 hours, and I had my license and had 3 hours to fly because the Air Force paid for 36 hours. And one of the funny things is that, of course, you want to show everybody you know that you can fly. So my wife, Molly, who was my girlfriend at the time, she got in the airplane with me. And Charlie Steptoe, who was on the football team with me, he's also from Centralia. We flew up Centralia, and I gave a couple people from Centralia rides. And remember now, a 172 doesn't fly very fast. And while you're up at 2,000 or 3,000 feet, it's still daylight. Well, once we landed, the sun started to go down. So now we got to beat it back to Carbondale. We got in the airplane flying back to Carbondale, and we were landing on 2-4 that night. And it got dark. So since I had never had any night flying, and you learn to be cool as a pilot, I didn't even know where the landing light switch was. So we turned final about 4 miles out, and I'm trying to be cool and trying to find this landing light switch. We found it about a mile on final. Of course, the runway lights was on. It was not a big deal, but it was just interesting. And the first time that I found out as a pilot, you never say you lost. You typically disoriented, misplaced, but you always stay cool. Don't let fear show.
You went to the Air Force?
Yes, I went in the Air Force.
What year was that, Bill?
I went in the Air Force in 1959. I got out in 65. 1959, I went to pilot training. And the first month you go to Lackland Air Force Base for...
You went to Lackland Air Force
Base. Went to Lackland Air Force Base for a month. Then you get selected, they'll select you for what base you're going to. And my base was going to be Mission Air Base down in southeastern Texas. Well, the flight surgeon happened to be African American. And so when I got the assignment, he said to me one day, "You don't want to go down there." He said, "They don't graduate black pilots from down there." I said, "Really?" He said, "No." Well, I've always been stubborn and not too bright, so I decided to go to mission and went down there. And my first instructor in mission was the same type guy as Glenn Sheets. He was mean, crusty, bachelor. Both of them were bachelors, but good instructors. So it wound up being a great experience down there. And one of the things that happened while I was down there was an African American 6 weeks ahead of me who graduated before me. But we had, check rides every so often. And when I was in the T-28, we had a check ride that was checking you out, see how well you're doing in the T-28. And anyway, I went down for this check ride, and of course it's early morning, and I'm spit shining and everything. And I was getting a check ride from a guy named Archie Belvin. And the people down there had numbers, and his number was Honcho 13. Now Archie Belvin had flunked 13 of the last 14 people he had flown with. They were all white. And so I went over to the headquarters to report, and it just happened as I was sitting on the bench, a young lady came up who was Mexican, and she worked. We were about 15 miles from Mexico, and she was a very attractive young lady, and a lot of the old people were hitting on her and everything else. But anyway, she was very pleasant, and being African American, everybody knows you. So she sat down and said, "Well, you having a check ride today?" I said, "Oh yes." And she said, "Who was your check ride with?" And I said, "Lieutenant Belvin." She said, "He's not so tough." And I said, "Well, he flunked a guy before they started engines." And she said, "Well, how'd that happen?" Well, he got in the cockpit and he said, "I'm ready to start." And Lieutenant Belvin said, "You got a down," which is a flunk. He said, "How can I have a down? I haven't even started the engine." He said, "Let's get out of the airplane." They went outside and looked at the airplane. It was still tied to the ramp.
Oh.
The guy had not untied it. He was so nervous. So anyway, Lieutenant Belvin came in. I jumped and saluted, and we got back down. So this young lady said, "Well, one thing about it, they always give you simulated engine failure at the worst time." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, he does." So we went out and got in the airplane. I took off. We were 400 feet in the air. He pulled the power back, said, "You've lost it." I said, "I'm going through my restart procedure." He said, "Not going to start." He said, "You've lost it." And I said, "Okay, I'm on base leg. I have my field picked out to the left," and went in and shot the approach, and everything looked good. We went up flying. He hadn't said a word. We went back in his office. He said, Lieutenant Norwood said, "Where are you from?" I said, "Illinois." He said, "I'm from Missouri." He said, "That's a southern state." And I said, "Well, sir, I don't know. I thought it was a border state, but I don't know." He said, "No, it's a southern state." And we parried a little bit for a little while. Then he said, "Why did you come down here?" I said, "Well, sir, I was assigned here." He said, "You never heard anything about this place?" I said, "Oh, no, sir." He said, have you ever heard," and I think he said Negro, he might have said color, "pilots have ever graduated from down here?" I said, "No, sir, I never heard anything like that." Now, he hasn't said whether I passed or flunked anything. And so finally he said, "That was a good ride." And he said, "You're going to graduate." He said, "The only way they can flunk you out is to come through me." And he said, "At least you've been studying and you are a good pilot, and just continue to study and you'll graduate." And that was really a relief and a greater responsibility, because you have someone believing in you. But you find out too, people can be fair. And you can see fairness in people in the most unsuspecting places. But that was a good experience.
I hadn't heard that. I hadn't heard that one from you. That's
Oh, really?
very interesting.
Oh, okay.
No, I had not heard that. Why did you pick bombers, or were they picked for you?
Why do you pick bombers? Typically in the military, you're familiar with the Air Force, they have so many slots. And the first thing when we went to pilot training, the first thing they said, a third of you are not going to graduate. I don't care how good you are. A third of you are not going to graduate because they only needed X number of pilots. Well, the class before us had like 40 slots for this particular class. 25 were fighters. And when you're in pilot training, you're always taught you want to be a fighter pilot. So when our class came down, we had two fighters. One was a 102, and one was an F-86. Well, the F-86 was a direct route in the backseat of a B-47 after 6 months. I was number 4 in the class. There was about 45 of us in there. And the number 1 pilot said, "I'm going to take that C-118, which is a C-54, 4-engine propeller." He said, "I'm going to build up my time, and then I'm going to airlines." And everybody booed and hissed and everything else to him. So then got second guy, he took the 102. And I would have taken the 102. Third guy took the F-86. And I was four, and we had two B-52s, which was the best of the stuff remaining, because we had C-119s in there, which was garbage.
Yeah.
And I said to my roommate, I said to him, Dick, look like you're going to Little Rock, Arkansas, because I'm taking the B-52 at Travis Air Force Base. And he took the one at Little Rock. But that's how I got the B-52. I always wanted to fly the F-101, but we didn't have any good fighters when I graduated. And, God takes care of you, because if I'd have gotten a fighter, I'd probably stayed in the Air Force for 20 years or 25 years, or even gotten shot down or whatever. But that was my love, and it wasn't available.
How did the B-52 prepare you for flying airliners?
Well, the B-52 is number one. It's a big airplane, multi-engine, but I think it prepares you for flying with the airlines more so because it's a crew-oriented operation. You have an aircraft commander, you have the co-pilot, navigator, radar navigator, gunner, and electronics warfare officer. So you're accustomed working with a crew. And when you get in the airline, it's a crew operation. And they would pick multi-engine pilots over fighter pilots quite often, simply because they had been into a crew and understood crew coordination and how a crew works.
When you got out of the Air Force in '65, what led you to the airline career? What made you think that this was the way to go?
Well, what happened is that in 1964, as you remember, they had the Civil Rights Law of 1964. And up until that point, there were no African Americans flying passengers in America. Now, there was a pilot named Martin who was flying for Flying Tigers, who was African American, who was flying cargo. So when the airlines started saying we're equal opportunity employers, and it kind of piqued my interest. But I would have stayed in the Air Force, and I asked to get a check ride only to upgrade to captain. They said you're 200 hours short, and I'd been doing everything on a check ride you could do, and doing it well. And then I said, well, let me get out of SAC, and I applied to get a nuclear master's in nuclear chemistry at Ohio State University. Air Force accepted me, and SAC said we can't let this co-pilot go because the whole unit will fall apart. And that's when I started looking at other avenues. And I talked to a buddy who was talking about getting out, so I applied with the airlines. And very intelligently, since I didn't have any mentors or anything, American and United were the two airlines I was looking to apply to. And I chose United because Molly and the boys had flown it and they liked it. Not a very intelligent way to choose a career, but that's the way it was.
You told me about the selection process one time, that you and Molly ended up being taken to dinner in how many different places?
Well, we applied in San Francisco, so that was the regional office we were going to get our interview and everything. So since I was going to be the first African American with United, they wanted to make sure I was acceptable socially. And they never said that. But it was just curious that we were invited to dinner 5 times with different managers in San Francisco who were in the United hierarchy, and we knew the game they were playing. They were checking us out and seeing how we're going to fit in and not embarrass them. So I took them to 5 of the most expensive restaurants in San Francisco. And we had a great time because we knew the game. And one of the interesting things is that when I went over to take my physical, they got a huge, medical department out in San Francisco. So they did all the tests and everything, said, you look good, everything looks great. But we need to make a test. And we want you to go to a hospital, which was like 10 miles away, and do this test. I said, wait a minute, I know what they're getting to. But I said, well, these huge facilities you got here, you can't give me all the tests that I need to get to be a pilot? Well, we're not equipped at quite, and would you do this for us? I said, yeah, I'll do it, but I just can't understand why we can't do it here. He said, well, we're not quite equipped. I said, do you want me to go take a sickle cell test? Oh, yes, would you? and they didn't have the capacity to do a sickle cell test because they never had black pilots. So there's no sense in having the equipment to do a sickle cell test. So I went to the hospital and take it, and there was, of course, no problem.
What was it like to actually move out to the flight line at United in those days?
It was interesting because everyone is trained to the same level in training. However, since I was African American, some of the people wanted to watch me a little bit closer and not give me the amount of freedom that they would give other white pilots who had gone through the same training. But they want to keep an eye on me, so I understood what was going on. But I always worked hard at my craft, and I wanted to be super qualified so that there was no question about my ability, nor was there a question about the race in general, since they were going to come to a conclusion on one person. I said, so it was fun.
What was airline life like?
Airline life, oh, it was great. Airline flying was great back at that time because we were flying 14 days, 15 days a month, flying in good conditions. My first airplane was DC-6, and it was very complicated. And they were the old school, teaching a lot of stuff you didn't need to know, like magnetos and things. And they finally came to the conclusion that if you can't fix it in the cockpit, you don't need to know it. Just for example, we had a smoke and fire emergency procedure that you had to know by memory. It had 37 steps in it. That was my initial training. 37 steps, which was unbelievable. I mean, stuff you don't need to know. But anyway, the airline flying was good. It was great, and those were the glory years of being a pilot.
What was your favorite airplane?
Not only the favorite airplane is the one you're flying at that particular time.
Yeah.
I liked them all. DC-6 I wasn't particularly enamored with. I mean, a lot of the guys were talking about how they missed DC-6. DC-6 is flying at 15,000 feet in the middle of thunderstorms and everything like that. You backfire the engines every now and then. I like jets. Get me up to altitude and you spin it up and you light the fire and you go. I like the 727, and I think most pilots like the 727 mainly because the 727 was an airplane with the big speed brakes, with the big flaps and everything. You could get out of a situation easily when you back yourself into a corner. If you got too fast in a 727 on final approach, you could slow it down. In a 757, if you get too fast in a 757, you're going around. It was so interesting because one day Molly and I were flying in first class when we could get there years ago, and we were doing the river approach at Washington, D.C. And river approach, you go down the river and you're losing altitude all the way down. So we were about 8 miles out on this approach, and it was a new captain in a 757, and I'd flown the 757. And so I said to Molly, we're going around. She said, how do you know we're going around? I said, we're too hot at this altitude. He's not going to be able to get it slowed down. She said, oh, no. I said, okay. So we're going down the river and everything like that, and pretty soon you hear the power come up, and he does a missed approach. The at 757 I really enjoyed because one thing about it, it was a powerful airplane. It would go to 37,000 feet at max gross rate, which was wonderful. And it took a little bit more skill to fly. You had to plan. The airplane will not go down and slow down like a 727 would. So you have to stay ahead of it. And I retired on DC-10, and Jack, you're familiar with 172. The DC-10 flies just like a 172 for landing and everything. It's unbelievable. You just bring it in, you start to flare it, you start to feel for the ground. And on my final flight, I landed DC-10, and we had cameras in the airplane. They were filming it in the tower. They had news people filming it and everything else. And about 30 pilots were on board for my last flight. And it was interesting. My son was in the tower as an air traffic controller. So when I came in, and they had blocked space around me, and it was daylight today, clear day. The wind was 320 at 8, and they asked me to land on 27 right. Well, there were a lot of people, about 500 people waiting in the terminal when I got there, and they wanted me to land on this runway because it was closest to the terminal. I said, whoa, why can't I have 27 left, 32 left? They said, airport's yours, you can use any runway you want. So I used 27 left, and everybody's trying to help me land this thing, and my son is telling people to salute me and this kind of and I asked him about 200 feet. I said, are you guys in the tower grading this landing? And they said, every last one of us are. So, and it was a grease job, and it's on film, so I don't have to lie about it. It's not like fishing where it gets bigger and bigger. I have it on film, and it was a grease job. So all the pilots in the back and all the well-wishers were helping me get it down in a very soft manner.
I actually have that one on tape. Back
Oh.
to the building. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's like no shortage of stuff to use for your peace bell. It's
Okay.
amazing. I've got more stuff on you than I think I've had on any of the folks who's ever won this award. It's amazing.
Oh, okay.
Just by
well,
knowing you. You know. At the same time as you were flying at United, I've read that you and Molly were working on civil rights issues back in Chicago. Was it the Chicago area?
yes. Yeah.
What were the things you were doing at the community level when you were living there?
Well, number one, we moved to Elk Grove Village. We were about the fifth African American family, and we had gone through a lot of things being rejected in housing throughout the Chicago area. And so we started working with Martin Luther King group to facilitate getting housing and jobs in the community, and this worked well. So we did those type things, and we became very active in the community, so we could help people get into the community and ease some of the fears, basically. Not only from the people who are entering, who happen to be African American, but from the people who are in the community who are afraid of African Americans. To give you an example of one day in Elk Grove Village, we had been there 7 or 8 years, and the police came by the house and knocked on the door, and I knew several policemen. And he said, I'm really embarrassed to come and ask you this. He said, but do you have a relative visiting? I said, no. I said, why do you ask that? He said, well, it's silly, but a neighbor called and they saw a black man walking down the street and they wondered, was it a neighbor of ours or was he lost or whatever? And I said, why didn't they just go out front and say, sir, are you lost? May I help you? Or, this kind of thing. But that's some of the things you dealt with. And it was an educational process, sometimes kind of difficult, but quite often it's being unaware. Because we had one neighbor we were talking to it one day, and she was talking about Native Americans. And I said, well, what do you know about Native Americans? And she said, they drink a lot and get drunk and they fight. And I said, wait a minute. Where did you get this image? Well, in the movies, that's what they do. I said, have you ever met a Native American? No. I said, why do you come with, mess like that? I mean, until you meet someone, don't take your images from the media, whether it's print media or, movies and things.
Were you active in the school system with your sons going through school up there?
Yes. Well, my wife taught in Rolling Meadows, and I actually substitute taught for 3 years at the high school. And at that particular time, there were there were 2 African Americans out of 2,500 students. So that was fun. And I actually got to teach because you always start in PE, and people would challenge you, but since I was fairly good in PE and I could rough up people when I needed to in football, we had no problem. Then it got to the point where I could teach people understood. I could teach math, chemistry, English, and it became great because when I went to school to teach, I taught, and we didn't mimeograph and have handouts, so it was fun.
When did you get active with the SIU Board of Trustees?
In 1974. What happened is that Barry from the who was with the Civil Rights Organization, with Bill Barry, he was the first one appointed who was African American to the SIU board. He stayed about 6 months. Then a man who was in construction, who was African American, was on the board about 6 months, and then they were going to replace him. And it gets interesting because quite often you see this, it becomes a black seat or one seat, possibly black, and this kind of thing. So I was called.
Let's let this guy get by. Looks like the RGs are coming back in to do some work.
I don't know, I think I just leave the gear down on that thing. That does not look like a good system.
I've seen him have to belly one in before because stuff
it's terrible.
breaks.
It's terrible, yeah.
As you were saying.
But Jack O'Daniel called me from the Alumni Association, and asked me would I be interested if they supported me. And I said, what's it about and everything like that. And I said, yeah, I would. Then my brother-in-law, Austin Cross, Molly's younger brother, worked for Dan Walker. He knew Dan Walker, and so the appointment came through. It came through in 1974, and I was completing a term for 2.5 years. And I guess everyone expected me to be here for 6 months and leave, but after that I was reappointed a few times.
Well, it was your alma mater. Your mother went here, and relatives went here. I know it was a huge thing. What were your feelings about? What were some of the goals you had for SIU and for the kind of role you could play in shaping this place that had been so important for you?
Well, SIU is very important to me, and I think the one thing that I wanted, and I still would like to see us do, is be more student-oriented. You know, treat students like consumers. And most of my joy here was dealing with the students. And I tried to encourage them to come to board meetings to see what the board is doing for you and to you, and not just come when an issue of great concern is coming before the board. But I think we need to get to the point where we're focused that the students come first, and not that they run the university, but they are our prime reason for being here.
I've been out with you on several occasions when I'd see you walk through Walmart or something and see a kid, come up short on money or something, and you walk over and help them out to, you didn't know him from Adam, but you were interested. You would always walk up to kids and say, "Who are you? Where are you from? What are you studying?"
Well, this is what I think is important, is that anyone connected with the university should go around the campus and talk to the students. And because once you're so interested in them, they believe that they belong more to the place, and somebody cares. And we should care for them. And it's amazing how much we can learn from the students, because they'll be honest with you. They'll tell you, here's what I like about it, here's what I don't like about it. This is one of the great qualities of Delight Morris. And again, they talk about it was 5,000, 7,000 students. It doesn't make any difference if it's 50,000. Deans, the president, the chancellor can take a couple hours out of a week and walk the campus and just talk to the students. And I think it would make a big difference.
How many terms did you serve on board, Bill?
Let's see, 4.5.
4.5.
I served for 27.5 years.
Yeah. That's an incredible run on the Board of Trustees. What are you most proud of what you were able to accomplish while you were in those roles?
Well, I think the big thing that I was able to accomplish is to help students understand that board members are accessible, faculty are accessible, and we still have connection with a lot of students. And we want them to be relaxed around us and not look at the board or the faculty, anybody else, as someone that's hierarchical or that are sitting on some throne. They're just people. And the more students can understand that whoever is successful started as a person like them, the better it is for all of us.
You have a saying about opportunity meeting preparation, or am I saying it right?
Preparation meeting opportunity. Yeah. Well, I think that's the key goal to success, period, for anyone, is that the definition of success, as far as I'm concerned, is when preparation meets opportunity. And if you never get prepared, all the opportunities in the world can come your way, and you'll never be successful. But if you're prepared, and prepared in different areas, you will get to be successful in many, many arenas. It's kind of like when they had the fuel crisis in '72, I went back to school and got my MBA from the University of Chicago. Not that I needed it for flying, but it sure was a comfort level. Say if something happened to my health, I would be able to go into another area. And also it taught me some things about arenas that I was unfamiliar with, particularly in the business area, which I didn't get in undergraduate work.
You were particularly close to the aviation school here and helped with working on programs like the United Internship Program and other programs that kind of gave our students a leg up on a lot of the competition at a lot of the other aviation schools. Could you speak to that?
Yes, well, the internship program is an outstanding program in any particular school or university, and it's particularly important in aviation because youngsters who are going into aviation don't have an idea what aviation is about. In the internship, they get to work at the different corporations and find out what it's about. They look at the corporations also look at them. And it's interesting, Barry Bateman, one of our students here, when I was on the board, he came up to me and said, what can I do to become a pilot? And we talked, and he reported to me periodically. He wound up getting an internship with United, and it was interesting because his supervisor at United in Denver had been my flight instructor in the 727. So we kept that connection there. And Barry Bateman is now with United, and Barry Bateman will be the #1 pilot of United by his last 7 years.
Wow.
I mean, and these are the kind of things that really make you feel good because not only do you help Barry Bateman can talk to others and help them and realize that these goals are not insurmountable. And I know today there's a youngster coming to the house, and his name is Travis Haas, who is out of Carterville, who was a mentee of Molly and mine, and he's with Delta now. And he started doing things just like we asked him to do, and has been very successful. And he will get opportunities outside of aviation, just like Barry will, and they will be prepared, and when the opportunity comes, they'll be able to help someone else.
One of the other things that I've been really impressed with, of course, is the summer flight program that you and your friends have operated here at Carbondale over the years. Tell us a little bit about that. It started with the Organization of Black Airline Pilots?
Yes, we started the Organization of Black Airline Pilots back in 1976, and we started for several reasons. One was to have a relationship among the pilots of different airlines, because some airlines you only had one black pilot, and sometimes they would get a little bit of a runaround. The other thing, one of the things, was to motivate our youth organizationally, and out of that came what we call ACE camps, Aviation Career Experience Camps, which was mostly a 1 week camp where we took youngsters in for 1 week, and it was an intense week. And during that week they studied aviation, they found a lot about it. They studied navigation, how an airplane works, what kind of careers they had in aviation, and in the process they got to fly quite often a simulator and got to fly hands-on an airplane. Because when we had a program, we would let them, I'd let students take an airplane off. After they taxied it a little while and they saw how to keep it straight, I would handle the power, but I'd let them take it off. I'd tell them to keep it straight, look down the far end of the runway, keep it going straight, and when I tell you to pull back, bring some pressure on it. So it was a lot more rewarding for the people who were working in it than for the students. And basically what we wanted to do when we brought the program to Southern Illinois particularly is to get youngsters who had not been in a technical field to show that they could be successful and didn't have to fear new technology, and they could succeed. They could succeed, and it worked well. And the big thing we strive to do down here was to have it gender diversified and also ethnic diversified. And usually we'd have 24 students, and we would have 12 females in it.
Pause just a second here. Looks like he's doing a soft field takeoff.
Takeoff.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Just gets it off the ground, lets it drag along about 4 or 5 feet off the ground.
Get it in the ground effect.
Yeah.
And
Get
accelerate.
get out of the grass.
That's right.
Well, I noticed that, is it Christina Mayberry?
Yes.
She's done extraordinarily well.
Yeah, Christina Mayberry, what we had planned in the program down here was take youngsters in the first week, and we do this at OBAP, some other places, and the ones who do well and show an interest, next year we'd have the basic week, and also we'd have a solo week. And we would have about 4 or 5 students in the solo program. And then the third year we would take them to a license. Now Christina Mayberry, who is from Carbondale, who was an outstanding student, and she did well, and I was kind of hard on Christina. I remember one time we were taxiing down, and Christina, I said, "Where's that yellow line supposed to be, Christina?" She's up the middle of my butt. I said, "Well, get on that line." And Ken treated it a little more kindly than I did. I was a little bit more demanding. But Christina has her private license, and Christine is also a sophomore in medical school at Stanford. So what we wanted to do was take youngsters and show them they could be successful. And one of the success stories out of the local camp here, I got a call from a woman in Southern Illinois who happened to be Caucasian. And she said, I have a son who is going down the wrong path. Could you possibly get him into your camp? And I said, well, send us the application, let us talk to him. He got into the camp, and this kid turned out from a D student to a B and A student his last 2 years, and now is a lieutenant in the Air Force. And those are the stories that make it all worthwhile.
There is a big part of you is all about giving back. Yeah.
Well, the thing about it is that all of us have been given a lot of assistance by people known and unknown. So we have an obligation to give back. We share a space on this earth. We should make it a better place and give back to people who need the assistance.
Amen on that. I'm going to go back and fill in a couple of spots here and there.
Okay.
At the Museum of Science and Industry, you can go in and see a 727, walk up into it, see it raise and lower its gear and everything. It's got your name on the side of it. Tell me about that.
Well, that was interesting. Since I was the first African-American pilot with United, and also since I'd done a lot with youth in Chicago, they wanted to do something special. And so what they wanted to do was paint my name on a DC-10, since I was on a DC-10. Well, my wife and Regina Frazier, who was in management up there, said, oh, that's not such a good idea. Said, because DC-10s will be retired. When the DC-10 comes to the gate, nobody knows who that person is. He said, but we have a 727 down at the Museum of Science and Industry. I'm going to put the name on that. And that's how it came about. And we had an executive vice president most pilots didn't like. I liked him. His name was Joel Gorman. And so they took it to Joel Gorman, and Joel Gorman made a decision. He just sounded like a good idea to me, do it. And that's how it came about. But
He's got quite a bit of seatbelt flapping there. Has there been any other work with civic groups and youth groups that I don't know about that would be helpful to know?
Well, I do a lot of work with the church. One of the things at the church we're very happy about is we have a missions committee. And how that came about is we had an anonymous donor in our church to give like $200,000 for missions. So we have been able to help a lot of areas in Southern Illinois, like the women's shelter, boys and girls clubs, the food bank. That has been a lot of pleasure. A lot of pleasure.
What church do you go to?
I go to First United Methodist Church.
First United Methodist?
Yes. And it's a good church, and it's oriented toward doing what Jesus would have you do. Help the people, help the poor. And it's very rewarding.
When I was hungry, you fed me.
When I was did have clothes, you clothed me. When I was in prison, you visited me. And when I needed water, you gave me a drink. And when you do this to the least of you do it to me. Yeah. So.
Have you read Gary? One of the other laureates a couple of years back, Gary Wills, wrote a great book called "What Jesus Meant."
Oh no, I've read that.
And it's a little thing about like that. And he said a lot of people try to imply what Jesus meant and all that. And he said what it comes down to at the end of it, he said there's only one test, and that test is the one you just spoke of. When I was hungry, you fed me.
Yeah.
And he said that's what Jesus meant.
That's right. Yeah. Because you talk about, and Jesus said, two greatest commands: to love your God with all your heart, spirit, mind, and soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. Period. That takes care of it. Yeah.
Phil, as you look back over an incredibly rich career, and both professionally and what you've been able to do, privately and in civic life, what are the things that give you the most satisfaction over what you've been able to do?
I think the most satisfaction comes from trying to tell youngsters, number one, they're important, and number two, they're role models. So they can visualize people watching them and trying to emulate them even when they're 13 or 14 years old. And once they get that image, then it helps them all through life. I think it helps them become more responsible because everyone has someone who's looking up to them. And so we have a responsibility to that person to be an example that is positive.
What did you think when you were notified that you were up for the Lincoln Award?
It was really a shock. I would say surprise, but it was a shock because I've been to it and I know the people who have received this award. And so it was something that just boggled my mind. And I was just excited about being thought of being nominated and then to receive the award and know the group of people that you're in and what the award meant and it means to me. It's a tribute and an honor that I'll never fully encompass the entire meeting.
I have one more question once this guy gets by. I say guy, I could be totally wrong on that.
The bluebird, once the bluebird
Yeah.
gets by, yeah.
How much of a factor in your success in life is owed to your good partner, Molly?
Oh, most of my success. If it weren't for Molly, I wouldn't be able to accomplish anything because we accomplished together. And I look at life and look at some of the people I've been involved with who happen to be female, you know, growing up. None of them, any of them, other than Molly, I'd be divorced from. You know, because I'm not the easiest person to live with. And Molly and I make a good team. And she supports me and I support her. And without her, no, none of this would be possible.
What are the things you're up to these days? What's on the horizon?
Well, we've had a lot of company this summer.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as doing things, I don't have any projects on the horizon. I'm still working with the church and a few other things. And one of the interesting things that I do, number one, I can't sing. But there's a man, Jim Jennings, in our church who gets a group of us together first Monday every month at 6:30 at First United Methodist Church. And we sing to people who are physically and mentally challenged. And it's good because I can't sing, but they can appreciate it. So we wind up about anywhere from 6 to 10 people singing. That's a lot of fun.
That is neat.
Yeah.
That is neat. I think we're done.